flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. Attendance, Secretary?
Certainly. Make sure people can hear me okay. All right, President Dr. Reese.
Present.
Vice President McDonough.
Here.
And Secretary Summers here. Treasury Hanser.
Present.
Trustee Schultz.
Here.
Trustee Schaefer.
Here.
And Trustee Whitney. Here. All present.
Item number 2 on the agenda are changes to the board agenda. I have none. Item number 3 is pre-scheduled public comment. I do not see that, so we'll skip it real quick and go on to number 4. The person who signed up to speak is not here. All right. All we have in the consent agenda are the minutes from the March 4th special meeting. So someone want to make a motion? Colleen?
Move to support the consent agenda as presented.
Do I have a support? James? Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. All right. What we're here for is item number 5 on the agenda, and that is for our superintendent search. So as you can see, as we're getting ourselves organized, I know they start at 6 o'clock, but we have a few minutes here. So you have a packet in front of you that have questions. I went ahead and doled them out to individuals ahead of time. Sorry, I didn't take consensus on that, but if you have questions now or would like to change what your position is in the question order, just let me know. Otherwise, we're good? Everybody understands? All right, well, that did not take 30 minutes, and I don't think our candidate is here.
We do have I can go for a walk, speaker.
You can,
She's here, so I'll go walk and bring it down.
okay,
She's ready, She's ready, yeah.
sounds good. Yeah, I saw that. We'll skip back real quick to item number 2. Mark, sorry to put you on the spot the minute you walked in, but we already started. You had a prearranged public comment. Did you still want to do that?
Only if it works, other, whatever.
If you want, we're ahead of schedule, so go ahead and come on up and you got your timer.
Thank you for allowing me to speak. I just want to encourage the new candidates that are listening and considering this role that in the past our school has been run by the superintendent primarily, and that the new structure is what's in our bylaws is it's going to be a board-run organization, and that our board president and the trustees are going to give them direction and be involved in every detail of the school operations. So they need to be open to listening and to take the leadership from this board. They also need to know that we have 2 board members, Heather and Mary, along with employees who are named in a $3 million report that are going to be held accountable and addressed until they're removed or until they're gone from this community. So that is going to happen, and you know, Stephen Wolf, he's still here. We have serious financial issues now with the misuse of funds from these 2 previous board members wasting our money. And we've got a lot of challenges ahead, but our community is looking to unite with the new board members and our new superintendent to work together to bring peace in our community and hope. So I think part of that is bringing accountability to the people who are named in the investigation and getting them out of our school so we can move forward without their games. And I would just say, if anything, as a new superintendent coming in, maybe you could use Dr. Markovich, who's been here for over a year now, as an example of what not to do. She has been divisive and destructive in our community. And as far as I'm concerned, she can be thankful I'm not on the board, because I would fire her immediately. So we've got some tough work to do ahead of ourselves, but it's for a good cause. It's for our children, but mostly it's for the victims who were murdered on November 30th and their families who don't have their children anymore, because the previous board that included Mary Hanser and Heather Schaefer did not do their diligence in providing the oversight necessary for the security of our children. And we're going to address that and resolve that issue. Why you're still here, I don't know. I don't know.
Thanks, Mark. Okay. So we're going to take a brief recess while Angela gets the candidates. So if you want to break to recess at 5:39, we'll come back with the candidate and start the interviews. Thank you. All right, good. We're returning from recess. It's 5:44. We're running a little bit ahead of schedule. Dr. Tanya Milligan, thank you so much for coming up here to Oxford today. We appreciate you coming.
You're welcome.
We did a brief set of introductions, but I'm Erin Reese, the board president, and with me are my esteemed colleagues
Nice to meet you all.
from the board here, all 6 of us. We appreciate you coming again. So if you wouldn't mind, we do have OCTV here, so they are a local community television channel. They will be recording it since some of our families won't be able to attend in person.
Understood. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So why don't you take a minute, if you don't mind, and introduce yourself and give us a little bit of information about your background, your strengths, your current position.
Okay, absolutely. Well, I know you have my resume, so probably don't need to go into those details, but been in education a long time. It is my passion. It is my love. I absolutely love working with children and families and communities. I brought my husband of 28 years, so I think it's obligatory at that point in time. So I appreciate him coming with me today. We have 2 children. My daughter is 24, and my son is 22, and he will be graduating in May from the University of Tampa. And he was a senior when the pandemic hit, so it really threw him for a loop. He had some mental health challenges that we had to work through, and so it's a victory for everybody to have him graduate in May. So that's really exciting. It's and it's in marine science. So he took after his mom. I have a degree in life science. So we love to hike. We have 2 dogs. They're at my husband likes to call it puppy summer camp, but it's really reform school because we adopted them just a couple months ago, and they needed a little support. So they're at reform school learning, so it's Winter and Rocco. We have 2 cats that are about 15 years old, and a therapy bunny that I inherited. I don't know if you've seen that video. So that was a gift from my previous high school that I worked at. When we came back from the pandemic, we ended up needing some additional support for students. And one of the teachers recommended a therapy dog. I said, no, I'm not up for that challenge. And he said, well, I do know someone who's fostering a rabbit. How about a therapy rabbit? And I was like, hadn't really thought about that. So we did end up adopting her. We named her after the school. The school's name is Briggs, and so we called her Briggsy. And the students just absolutely fell in love with her, worked very closely with her. Some of them had, many of them dealt with trauma and needed to just spend time with her so that they could make it through the day. So that was really helpful. I also worked with kids who would come down and they would just be so in their heads, dealing with trauma, that sometimes they just needed something furry, and you put something furry in their hands and they're like, I have something furry, and all of a sudden they're able to get out of their heads and kind of calm down. So she's with me now just because of new leadership. She was a lot to take care of, and so new leadership gifted her to me. Let's see, what else? I currently serve as the Executive Director of Teaching and Learning in the Columbus City Schools. I love the people I work with, my colleagues, the community that I serve. It is truly an honor to work for our families. And I do all, you name it, I probably do it. Professional development, K-12 curriculum for everything except for literacy. I work with professional learning and licensure and making sure people have everything they need to teach or to be an administrator, whatever the case may be. We also, learning technology is under my purview as well. So it's a lot, but I have a lot of amazing people that I work with. Currently, we are working on our strategic plan around math. When we came back from the pandemic, it was literacy. We leaned heavily into literacy, rightfully so, because if you can't read, it's really hard to do anything else. And so our reading scores have grown significantly. The resources have been amazing. The professional development has been amazing. So now we're coming alongside of the success of literacy and bringing in math to try and amplify those math opportunities for students. And we're focusing primarily on equity equity in math. Historically, and I don't know if any of you have ever said this, I know I haven't because I love math, but some people will consider themselves not a math person. Hopefully you've never said that. But we have kids that do that because the way they look at math is different than the way we teach math, right? And so all of a sudden they're like, well, I'm not good at math, when in reality they just do it differently, right? And, you know, I know that the IB program is pervasive in this district. I'm not sure if all that, I saw that several of the elementary schools had it identified. But that's what that's about. It's about creativity. It's about thinking about problems differently. And so we're trying to lift that up in our district to strengthen our math thinkers. Everybody has a math brain, right? It's just how you use it, really. So that's what I get to do day in and day out, and I'm truly honored to have the opportunity, and I'm truly honored to be here and have an interview. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So what makes you interested in wanting to be in Oxford Community Schools' next superintendent?
Knew you were going to ask that question. So it was actually brought to my attention about the opening. And the specific statement was, I think this is a great fit for you. And my question, of course, is, well, what makes it a great fit? And unfortunately, I have worked in communities that have dealt with significant trauma, gun violence, in some cases, suicide. We've lost students to accidents. I've worked in some really marginalized communities where resources aren't readily available, so they struggle for the day-to-day resources that they need. So those non-academic barriers are significant. And so, not that I ever went into education to say, yes, I want to get these skills. I want to be a trauma-informed person. It really came about before any of that terminology was lifted up, right? It was just something that I did with students. I learned about them. I learned about their needs. I worked closely with their families. We modified our approaches to support them. We worked with community entities to get them the resources they needed, whether it be food, whether it be getting the electricity turned back on, whatever the case may be. We really partnered with our communities to support our students, because if you can't support non-academic barriers, it's very difficult to get to the academic success that you know your students can accomplish. So I have those skills. It's certainly something that aligns with what the leadership profile indicates as far as the trauma-informed practices. I collaborated with my teachers. I was a high school principal for 7 years, and the first thing I noticed when I got to the school, Columbus is a very large district, and I've worked in every quadrant of the district. When I got to this school in particular, it was extremely evident that we needed some mental health resources. Right? I think within the first month I was there, we had to transport multiple students to the hospital because they were having suicidal ideations. And I thought, wow, this is different. I wasn't expecting something like this, but we didn't really have, other than an extremely nurturing and wonderful staff, we really didn't have any systems in place to support students in crisis, and so we kind of had to develop them on our own. I mean, I don't mean on our own. There were community partners that we partnered with to provide support for students and make sure that they got the help that they needed, with or without their parent involvement, because sometimes it's hard to convince parents that their student needs mental health support, and sometimes you have to just make that decision for them because it's in the best interest of the student. And when we did that, we would work closely with our school resource officer to make sure that the students stayed safe, got the help that they needed, and were able to at some point in time, transition back into the school with a safety plan. So that was early on in my principalship. And then we really focused on, okay, so this is programming. How do we work on the culture of the school? How do we make sure that every student that walks in this school feels comfortable, no matter what they're bringing, no matter who they are, no matter what the challenges they face, they are welcome, they are supported. What do we need to do? And so, couple things. A group of teachers and I went to a trauma-informed conference. It was in Florida that year. And I believe it was 3 days. And again, this is before it became like a big deal, before the pandemic. So we didn't really have a roadmap on what to do. But we went to that conference and we're just so in awe of the potential of that program, and what we could do with our students and with our culture. And my teachers were incredibly jazzed about it, as far as what we could put in place. And so what we ended up leaning heavily into is a sense of belonging. We really wanted to make sure that every student, we had a very diverse population. It's a cross-section of the United States. If you name it, we have that student in our school. And so figuring out how do we create that sense of belonging so that any student that walks in feels a part of the community, right? And so he said connection. So we came up with a slogan. It's our PBIS slogan. It was our mascot was Bruins, and it was Bruin Strong. And I saw the signs, Oxford Strong, and I thought, there you go, right? And so worked on relationships. We worked on getting to know kids as kids, right? Their interests, their passions. We worked on trying to integrate that into the curriculum so that they saw themselves in the curriculum. So we did all those things. And reading through, I've read a lot about Oxford, and reading through those materials, it's almost like it was a parallel existence, right? The same things that, you're implementing and you're thinking of and you're trying to do, I was trying to do those things as well as a principal. I absolutely love and adore your Wildcat pack. I need that in my life. I especially like the one with the mohawk. So, I mean, just even to that, like having therapy animals for your kids, that's amazing, right? Having community resources for mental health, all of those wraparound services that, historically we haven't been really great about supporting, come to school, do school. But the reality is our kids need more, and it's incumbent upon us to provide that. That's probably a roundabout way of telling you how I got here, but there you go.
Sounds great. Heather and James.
Okay. Tanya, what strategies would you, oh, sorry, Tanya. What strategies have you used or would you use to balance your time in the district and out in the community? Like, where do you see that role as a superintendent?
I love it all. Like, I loved being with our families. I love going, like, you guys had Beauty and the Beast this past weekend. I would have loved to have come up to see that. I love the arts. My mom is actually a wonderful artist, and so I have that. But I also was athletic when I was in high school and in college, and the academic, like, all of those things are just, I just love them. So my ideal day would be a combination of both. Would be attending community opportunities, whatever that happens to be, whether it's local government, whether it's faith-based, whether it's community events. But mainly I would just love to be in the schools. Like, pretty much that's the highlight. When I get to be in our schools and go to the classrooms and have an opportunity to give feedback to the principals. It's my joy. It's why I do what I do. So I would say that's the highlight of my work, but there's always the back, the paperwork and all that other stuff that has to get done. That's not my forte, so, but I do know that's a part of it. So I would try and balance that, minimize that, to be at events, to be in the schools, to be with the community. That would be my priority.
And you talked a little bit about this just in that answer, but what do you consider your communication style? Like, how do you think that how are you planning on working with the administrators in the buildings?
So first and foremost, I have to get to know them as people and their leadership style, their vision for their school and its alignment with the district vision. You know, communication for me is definitely two-way, you know. It's not just about me. Don't tell my husband that. Close your ears, honey. So mainly it's about listening to what someone's passion is. And not only their passion, but also what their hopes are and what they see themselves doing in the future. Because ultimately my job and my goal is to build capacity so that within us, you know, wherever I am, there are people whose skills have grown and they've grown as a person so that they can take on whatever the next step is for them. Similar to what we do with children, right? We want them to grow and learn and have opportunity and take that next step. So I would say my communication it's very open. I am, when it said in the leadership profile, transparent, I am often overly transparent. Like, you don't have to guess what I'm thinking, right? I will share that. And if I can't share it, I'm very transparent about that and why I can't share it, right? So if it's a privacy situation or whatever the case may be, but I'm very transparent about my thoughts, about my hopes, about my support, and I expect that there be similar communication back. Now, I also know that that's not everybody's forte, right? Some people communicate differently. So it's really about figuring out how we can communicate effectively with each other and creating opportunities for those things to happen, right? So the people who report to me currently, I meet with them on a regular basis, on a touch base. Sometimes it's on Zoom, sometimes it's face-to-face. And sometimes it's just me saying, hey, how are you doing? How's it going? I know you have these goals. I know you're trying to accomplish X, Y, and Z. How's that going? Right? And sometimes it's great and sometimes it's not. And sometimes it's more along the lines of, how are you doing as a person? Like, how are things? I know you were struggling with this situation in your family. How is that going? Are you okay? Right? So in order to be who we need to be for kids, we need to be that for each other as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So you talked a little bit about transparency, so I'm going to change it a little bit on what, you know, how would you use the skills that you talked about in the transparency and your other communication to really have a difficult conversation with stakeholders?
First thing is you need to listen, right? You need to listen, and I don't mean you hear the words. I mean listen deeply to what they are saying. What are their values that they're sharing with you? What are their fears that they're sharing with you, right? It's rarely my way or the highway. That's not how we are successful together. So it's about listening to what the situation is, understanding where they're coming from, and then figuring out, you know, the concept of seek to understand before being understood. And so finding common ground to move forward, right? It's rare that I come into a situation where this is the way it has to be and this is the way it is, right? With the exception of safety. Safety, there are protocols that are in place for a reason. We are not wishy or washy, like, this is what's happening. But outside of safety, kids' safety, it's really a collaboration as far as what we want to accomplish for our kids. That student-centered focus, it has to be around students. And I know sometimes as adults we get stuck because we think about ourselves, and I think that's natural to think about yourself and, what's in it for me sort of mindset. But we have to train ourselves to re-envision what we're doing in terms of students. Students always have to be at the center of our decisions. So if we go down path X, how does that impact students? If we go down path Y, how does that impact students, right? So typically when you put it in terms of students, you find common ground pretty quickly because people want great things for kids. It's just that we look at it a little differently.
Okay, I'm next. I'm going to talk about student achievement. What are the most important areas in which Oxford Community Schools should invest time and money to ensure student success?
Well, I know IB is big in the district, which is really exciting, the way that the curriculum's set up, because your vision has to do with global citizens, and that's what IB is all about. It's not about, just Michigan or just Ohio, I said Ohio, sorry. Or just the United States. It's global. It's how you're approaching the work globally. So I would say, I would want to see data that would indicate that's having the intended impact. As far as student achievement, I would be shocked if it wasn't, right? Just seeing awards and seeing all the great things going on at Oxford. But it really comes down to the data and seeing, who's being successful. Are all kids being successful? Are there any demographic groups that aren't being successful? And if that's the case, why? What's happening? Is it our teaching practices? Is it our curriculum? Is it our implementation? What is it? So I would say from a perspective of student achievement, and I do want to differentiate between achievement and growth, right? So achievement is there is a bar and you meet it or you don't meet it, right? So that's achievement. Growth is, all right, you came in here, we worked with you throughout the year, and now you didn't quite make the bar, but whoo, look how far you came. You increased several grade levels. Now, historically, state tests have not acknowledged that. They are changing to be able to look at that growth model. So that's also something to consider. How are kids growing? Because if they come in at a certain level and they leave at the same level, even if they're at that bar, we haven't done them a service. And so it's really breaking down the data, looking at who is benefiting, who isn't benefiting, and trying to target those interventions to make sure and sometimes those interventions are for us. It's for the adults. Like, what are we doing that needs to change in order for kids to be successful? Okay.
What do you see being the biggest challenge for student achievement in Oxford?
So I had the opportunity to watch some of the board meetings, and particularly one where students were talking about going to school and being challenged with anxiety, being challenged with all sorts of non-academic barriers, understandably so, right? And so I would say one of the biggest challenges is how do we ensure rigorous instruction, high levels of expectations, while simultaneously providing wraparound services for students and making sure that when they are triggered, we have supports in place. Now, what I've read is that the staff is incredibly supportive, which is huge, right? Because they're the ones who see the students day in and day out, right? So they know if a student comes in and they are behaving differently, or they look different, or they make mention of something that they don't typically talk about. The staff is typically the one that picks up on that and is able to, there's all sorts of, there's the threat assessment, there's all sorts of things that can cascade from there. But primarily, being able to support students in that they're not separate, right? We can't separate a student's mental health and their academic achievement. They're one and the same. So that's really the challenge of education in general, is how do we make sure we do both? Because both are equally important. It doesn't make sense if a student has high academic success but has so much anxiety they can't get out of bed, right? And so we really have to figure out how to balance those two approaches.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
So I think you talked a little bit about this in the beginning, but we'll just circle back to it. And how do you envision that as your role of a superintendent in a district like Oxford, that you would be able to bring together parents, community, organizations from the outside, governmental agencies, to create that healthy working and learning environment here at Oxford?
Yeah. Well, I have my tennis shoes outside, so I suspect I'd be using them quite a bit. I love doing that stuff. I just love working with our partners. I think I mentioned in my letter, or somewhere, Center of Science and Industry in Columbus, the mayor's office. We have so many partners that we work with that enrich the learning opportunities for students. We used to, when I was at Briggs, I'd work closely with the Kiwanis Club and the Key Club, which does all sorts of outreach programs and support oh my gosh, I loved that. And the gentleman that would come, he was just the sweetest man. And, I would talk to him on the phone, just getting to know people as people and figuring out how their passions and interests can be tied to student passions and interests is really fun, right? So finding out what our community really loves and what they do, and be there to experience it with them, and then say, hey, we have this great fit, right? Our middle school students are doing project X, Y, and Z, and I can really see how this would tailor really nicely. Would you consider, being a part of that? And almost always the answer is yes, because they're just thrilled to be welcomed in and support kids.
What's your leadership style or philosophy on creating collaboration between school administrators and teaching staff?
I would say, so my leadership style, I would consider servant leadership. I'm here to serve the families of a school district. I'm here to serve the staff and support the staff. I'm here to serve the students. So I would say that's my leadership style. Along with that is collaboration, right? So pretty much all the decisions that I make currently, and for the most part when I was principal, are done in collaboration, because you really tap into the brilliance of others. So I was on a Zoom call on the drive up, and we're working on we're doing a math summit this summer for our 113 schools. It's a lot of schools. And, their principals and their math teachers. And we had all these people on the call, and we're trying to figure out the logo. And it said, Math Excellence Pursuing Equity in Education. And one of my colleagues said, well, what's more important, the equity or excellence? And everyone just stopped. We were like, we've been working on this for months. Oh my gosh, that's brilliant. So we made the equity the key word and the excellence as a subheader. I'm telling you, when you come together with a group of people, it just galvanizes the creativity that comes and things that you would never think of, right? So when you make decisions in isolations, you are really doing a disservice to whatever project you're doing, whatever, initiative you're leading, because the brilliance is in the room. Like, you have to tap into that brilliance.
And then what about other work groups? in the schools. Teachers and administrators aren't it, right? There's a whole.
Correct. Right. So I'm pretty close. I'm actually really close with the head of our OPSI, our classified union. She's my work mom because I've known her for 25 years. And we'll call each other up, to talk through certain things. We were working on a project, and she felt that the project wasn't broad enough for the classified personnel, and we talked through it. And she had some great points and great ideas. So it's really, again, being open to that communication. I'm a big fan of just picking the phone up and calling people. That's my primary communication other than face-to-face. Like, email is the lowest form of communication. I know it's convenient, but face-to-face communication is really important. And again, setting time to have those conversations, because if we're not intentional, if we don't carve out that time, I'm sure all of you know, you blink and your day is over, and you're like, oh, I meant to talk to that person, and I meant to have this conversation. But if you don't have a specific time earmarked for that conversation, not only does it not happen, but also the message that it sends is that you're not important to me. And I would never want that message to be sent.
Hi, Tanya.
Hi.
So it was noted in many of the focus groups that the students, staff, and community are still deeply affected by the school shooting of 2021. What experiences, philosophy, or trainings do you have in the following areas? School safety. You did touch on trauma-informed care quite a bit, but if you want to add anything. Crisis management and policy management.
So, as the principal of a high school, I would say the challenges I faced were somewhat similar to some of the challenges that have been faced. We did not have the same tragedy. I want to clarify, we did not have that same tragedy. However, we did have gun violence. We did have weapons brought to the school. And so, crisis management is imperative, not just from a policy standpoint, but also from an application standpoint, right? So everybody has to be 100% clear and on the same page. So if A happens, we know that B, C, D, E, it just cascades. I don't have to tell you. You don't have to ask me. We know because we've practiced it, right? And so crisis management is an ongoing challenge. But my commitment to my families was always, you allow us to work with your child every day. And you trust me with their safety. And that means a lot to me. And if they don't leave my school safely, then I have failed. So crisis management is huge. Every child, and I mean every child, needs to know that they are safe and that they, at the end of the day, will go home to the people who love them, including, and this is a tough one, including students who are making bad decisions. All children deserve to go home safely to the families who love them. And so that is incumbent upon me to make sure that happens. And that comes down to training, that comes down to reiteration. We don't get it perfect every single time, but I'll tell you what, if things did not go right with our practice, we're going to regroup and we're going to have a conversation about how do we do better, because it's not just about us, it's about the children and the families we serve. So crisis management is a big deal. Policy, of course, backs that up. You have to make sure everything is in alignment, because you can't have a policy say one thing and our actions say something different. They have to be in alignment. Trauma-informed practices, as I mentioned, we did quite a bit of training with that. I can't remember if you said restorative practices or not. That's something that our district is leaning in heavily to recently. All of the leadership was trained in it, and it, I think, has tremendous potential And that is something I think if it hasn't been invested in, I have seen terminology used that it may be used. I just don't know how it's being used. And so leaning heavily into restorative practices. We had, I don't know if you're familiar with Challenge Day. So when I was at Briggs, we brought in Challenge Day, which is a nationwide program. And it's to support students in reconnecting and creating that community. And it was phenomenal. And the number one thing I can do to support all of those programs is be a part of them. So when my teachers are learning, when my students are learning, when my administrators are learning, I am learning right alongside them because I have to model that it's important. And I have to know what they know so that we can work together.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And as the new leader, how do you help the school district and community heal, but at the same time move forward academically?
Yeah, that's hard. And again, I've been listening. One of the things I really appreciate about the board meetings is the public comments towards the end. And what I appreciate about that, people are telling you. They're not, they're being very transparent of what they need and what they want. Now, not everyone can make it to a board meeting for a variety of reasons. And so finding ways to create opportunities for that communication on what are their fears, what are their hopes, how do they reconnect to moving forward. I know that the district has done work to support students and families, quite a bit of work, and it's really trying to find out what is working and what's not working. Is it enough? Is it not enough, right? Simultaneous, that kind of goes back to my earlier conversation. They're not separate, right? And they'll never be, it's not like they were ever separate really to begin with, but we just didn't really think about it too much. But they're one and the same. Like you can't just focus on academics and you can't just focus on health and wellness. It has to be both. It's those wraparound services. And so it's really working with families, understanding their hopes for their children, understanding their fears. What is it that's working? What is it that's not working? They were very clear in the survey, very, very clear that they want a superintendent who will connect with them in the community. And that is really what it takes to move forward, that we're in it together, that, you know, I'm not working against you, you're not working against me. Let's figure out how to move forward together and what that looks like. You're welcome.
Okay, Tanya, what is the level of involvement and participation of certain employees in organizational decisions? How do you determine what groups to include and when?
Good question. So you have to think about who all will be affected by a decision. And do you have representation of those people at the table when making those decisions, right? And honestly, the group we forget about the most, which is a sad tale, is students, right? We'll bring all these adults in from all these different organizations, and we'll make these decisions for students, and the students get, you know, experience the decision, and they're like, that was stupid, you know? You know, for example, I thought this was really funny on one of the statements for the students. You know, we try to communicate with kids, and they're always doing these different platforms and whatnot. You never know, you know, what best communication. And you know, one of them said, "Please stop using s'mores." And I love s'mores. I didn't really use it too much as a high school principal, but I use it now because it's easy, right? It's easy. But they were adamant. So it's really making sure, who is it impacting? Who is the decision impacting? And are they represented at the table? I was working with a colleague, and he was trying to get some insight into this spreadsheet where all of this information was on there. And it was about high school and things that happen at high school and things that impact students. And he said, could you look at this? And I said, of course. So I look at it, and it was so glaring to me. And I said, you know, there is someone really important. There's a group that's missing here. And he was like, no, I got everybody. Like, you have no counselors on there. Do you know how counselors are huge in working with students? And he was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I left them off. So most of the time it's not intentional. Most of the time we're just trying to get things done. We're trying to make sure that kids have what they need, and we're trying to make decisions as quickly as possible. But the problem is when you do that, you don't make the best decisions because you don't have all the right people at the table.
Thank you. What has been the most unpopular or challenging decision you have had to make, and how did you handle the reaction to that decision? What would you do differently?
Oh, I was a high school principal, so I had to make a lot of tough decisions. So I would say, so moving a high school who tends to be more traditional to a more student-centered model, it's a challenge, right? We tend to teach the way we were taught. And so when we started looking at trauma-informed practices and we started looking at, instructional strategies that benefit students more than the traditional, we started doing professional development on differentiation, blended learning, and it was not a popular thing, but honestly, the way I handle that is one, it's a collaborative effort. And I had many teachers who were very passionate about teaching in that way. And so you partner with those trailblazers and you try and find ways to put them in positions to support their colleagues and to move in a direction that benefits students. And so the second thing I always make sure I do when I'm making an unpopular decision is be transparent and tell the why, right? So especially when you're working with adults, the number one thing that you need to make sure you share is the why you're doing this. This is the decision I'm making, right? I've collected as much information as possible. I'm a reader, I love research, so I read a lot, I go to conferences, and here's this information. This is how it's gonna benefit kids, so this is why we're doing this. And, typically, they may not agree with the why, right? They might see it differently, which is great. Let's have some conversation. But for the most part, they appreciate the transparency and that you share the reasoning behind your decision making. You're welcome.
Hello again. Welcome to Oxford.
Thanks.
My questions are about board superintendent relationships. How do you view the board superintendent relationship? How will you keep board members informed and communicate with us?
Thank you. That's a great question. So again, when I first was made aware of the opening, the very first thing I did was watch a board meeting. So it's very important to me to work with people who are collaborative and who enjoy working with one another. And I can say that, in my opinion, watching you interact with one another was very positive to me, right? It was obvious that we're not always going to agree, right? There are times we're going to but there was a level of respect and understanding and a level of realness, if that makes any sense, authenticity, right? I can work with that. I love that, right? I enjoy interacting. I enjoy learning from people. So from a representative, you represent the community. So you have the ear of the community and you have those perspectives. That is essential to a superintendent's success. And so making sure that there are systems in place to enhance that communication. So there's obviously the formal board meetings, but that will never be enough. And so figuring out what informal conversations can take place and what that looks like, kind of would have to find out what systems are already in existence, what works or what doesn't work, what makes sense, and then figuring out, do we need to do more of those conversations? Our board members in Columbus, I think one of my favorite times to work with them is when we're out in the community. I was working in a middle school, helping them transition back to school, and one of our board members came and we had a great conversation, like a wonderful conversation about, kids and the technology and all the different concepts that, and I learned a lot from that conversation. And so I think just making sure that I'm open, I'm available, and I make sure that I provide opportunities for that interaction to take place.
We're good.
And my next question. In an effort to achieve what is referred to in other industries as high reliability or just culture, how do you
perceive?
Okay, I missed that earlier. How do you perceive the role of the superintendent in achieving this at Oxford? High reliability, just culture, as it's referred to.
It's also called safety culture.
Is that like zero tolerance? Is that what we're saying, or I don't really understand the question.
So high
I apologize.
reliability is creating an environment in which people feel safe to speak up.
Oh, okay.
Even if it's the littlest thing, that
Yeah.
they don't feel like there'll be retaliation for challenging superiors.
Got it. Yeah. Yeah, I don't think my staff got that memo because they challenge me all the time. Because I'm not the keeper of all knowledge, and I'm not the knower of all things. I'm not, my decisions, they're only good decisions if I hear from the people that support the work, right? But that's incumbent upon me to create that relationship and make sure that they know me as a person, I know them as a person. My team regularly pushes back, thank goodness, because I'm wrong sometimes. And it's helpful for somebody in a caring way to say, you know what? Yeah, you're off base there. That's not going to work, right? And so it's my responsibility to create that culture, and it's my responsibility to ensure we establish those professional relationships so that people are comfortable, coming forward. And then, so outside of staff, we can talk about one of the things that was really important to me is when I was principal was making sure anyone, and students, staff, families, it didn't matter. At that time, we used a program called Remind 101. And I said, anytime. And I was the keeper of the Remind 101, so they all came to me, which was great, and sometimes not so great. It just kind of depends. But, message me. If you are somewhere and you feel unsafe or something is happening, message me. Let me know. And I'll be honest with you, it was those messages that enabled us to thwart so many challenging safety situations. And so having those open lines of communication and making sure that people feel safe and comfortable with absolutely zero retaliation, right? Because that's ridiculous. So that we all can feel safe, so that we all feel comfortable coming forward and sharing our concerns, and it's okay. It's a culture that you create as a leader. You're welcome.
What questions do you have for us?
Oh, golly. I have read, this whole book is filled with notes about, I have done a lot of research, so I'm pretty clear on the path forward. I suppose one of my pieces that I'm most curious about are the efforts when it comes, because there's so much you guys have put in place. I'm curious, is there data, is there qualitative or quantitative, either way is fine, showing that's working, or is there data showing that it needs to be more robust? I couldn't find that.
I would have to say that there's data being collected. How we've reviewed it, manipulated it, made changes to it is probably something we're ready to start testing.
Yeah.
Is what I would say. So there's been a lot of work, a lot of people put a lot of effort into different areas. There's just so many different buckets
Mm-hmm.
that I think some areas probably need more attention than others because the people dedicated to them are brilliant.
Yeah,
here.
for sure.
Like our MTSS is brilliant. You know, the director of that is phenomenal. There's other areas where I think we have a lot of data, particularly around, you know, reporting. Our safety director has been really great at getting us data and stuff like that information, but I feel like that's a target that we have to continue to hit over and over again
Yeah.
because as people change, classes change. You know, we're in a interesting place where half our high school was present on November 30th, student-wise, and the other half was not, but may have had siblings.
Yeah.
And that's going to continue for quite a few years where those kids will graduate out, but their siblings or cousins or family friends will come up and their needs may be different than them. So how we measure it today may need to look different
For sure.
as those students start to progress through their high school years.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, because there's programming that I've used quite a bit and that we use in our district, so I'd be curious, you know, it's different from the programming that you use here, and so I'm curious, you know, what works, what doesn't work, because you certainly want to find things that are serving kids and the community in the best way, so I appreciate that. Thank you. So other than that, I think that's it. I appreciate your time. I appreciate you inviting me up. And obviously, you know, when I first started thinking about this position, the number one thing I wanted to do was offer my condolences for the loss of your children. That's devastating. And I am amazed and impressed at the resilience and strength that you have had and that your community has had. And so it is an honor to be here. And regardless of the outcome of this process, if I can ever be of service in any way, shape, or form, please let me know. Whether it's a thought partner, whether it's, hey, you said you had these resources, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Appreciate that.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm taking the water.
Are you driving home tonight?
No. Yeah, we're staying Spring Hill,
Are we good? Yeah. All right, back from recess at 6:58 for our second interview of the evening. Mr. Michael Jomini, I said it right.
Perfect.
Thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name again is Erin Reese. I'm the board president tonight, and I'm joined here with my 6 other colleagues, and we're going to ask you a bunch of questions.
That's what I expected.
Well, good. So if you don't mind taking a minute to introduce yourself, share information about your background, strengths, and your current or past work experiences.
Sure. My name's Mike Jomini. Thank you very, very much for the opportunity to sit with you tonight. I very much appreciate it. I have been in education for around 20 years. I started as a physics and a math teacher, South Redford Thurston, if you know where that is. And then I moved to the International Academy, where I also taught physics and mathematics, but in the IB program, in the diploma program, middle years program as well, and then moved into administration at that school. And that was a big learning opportunity for me. Wasn't really at that point where I thought I was ready to be an administrator, but I was cajoled and encouraged to jump in. And I did, and I've been an administrator ever since. Moved from there to Plymouth Canton to central office, working in curriculum, working K-12. That was a much bigger district, about 17,000 kids. Really eye-opening for me to understand the differences in needs of a small school like the International Academy, which was 650 kids at one campus, as opposed to a large district of 17,000 kids. You start to realize how difficult it is to keep all the schools and buildings and people on the same page in a large system, and I think that's something we sometimes take for granted in a smaller system. In Plymouth Canton, after working in curriculum, we reorganized the district, and I was moved into the position of regional director. So K-12, I was overseeing 8 buildings and had the opportunity to work with those principals, guide their work, supervise and evaluate, but also help support school improvement and district improvement planning and processes. And then from there, I missed the building level, and so I applied to be the principal of Royal Oak High School. And I stayed there for 7 years. It was an amazing experience. Of course, it was during the pandemic as part of that, so that was particularly challenging. But it was probably one of my favorite experiences, one of the places where I learned the most. Learned the most about building experiences, but also district level experiences, serving on policy committee and different avenues like that. And then most recently, I've moved to Novi as Assistant Superintendent of Teaching and Learning. Novi is very close to home. It's a wonderful school district, high-performing school district, I'm sure, as most people know. And this is a place where I have been challenged in ways that I did not anticipate. The people are incredible. The percentage, I should say, of hardworking, talented, dedicated, amazing educators and people is just, it's astounding. And they push themselves at such a high level, it causes everybody else to push each other at a high level. But it's such a sense of community that everybody wants everyone else to be successful, right? So the teachers want the administrators to be successful, the administrators want the teachers to be successful, we all want the kids to be successful. So it's just been very enriching being there. And now I sit before you, a hopeful candidate for Oxford Schools Superintendent.
Well, why don't we go into that a little bit and tell us why you believe you should be the next superintendent for Oxford Community Schools?
I know that it's no secret some of the challenges that this school district has experienced in the face of the tragedy, but also in what occurred in the subsequent months and years. And it feels like a place that is seeking healing, that is seeking an opportunity to move forward together, that is seeking to, I think the recovery plan references the idea of reclaiming the school, the district, and the community. And I think that's a nice aspiration. The reason I've applied is because I think that my leadership style, my approach, my presence is one of calm, one of listening, one of patience, and I think that that's echoed in letters of recommendation, support or reports from people that I supervise or people that supervise me. I think it's a pretty common theme, and I think that that's something that I can contribute, right? I want to go somewhere. I'm not running to be a superintendent just for the sake of being a superintendent. I want to go somewhere where I can be impactful, where I can be helpful, where I can make a difference. That's very, very important to me. And and something that I'm committed to. So I think, as I said, that Oxford is a place that I think I have heard through board meeting comments and things like that, that is seeking to move forward, is seeking to heal, is looking for resolution. And so I'm hopeful that my leadership style can contribute to that.
Great. So we're going to take turns asking questions, so you'll see us kind of bouncing around a little bit, but we'll start with Heather and James.
Hi there. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
I noticed that you wore blue and yellow.
I did, and
I'm
it
going to
was
say
on
that's
purpose.
intentional. That was
Yes.
calculated and smart, I think. What strategies have you used in the past, or would you plan on maybe using if you were superintendent in a district for visibility with your community, your stakeholders, balancing all of that?
So, in my experience, the two most visible positions in a school district are the school superintendent and the high school principal. It tends to be the case that there's the most events at the high school. So I'm no stranger to being visible, to being present at school events across the district. That's something that I do now. I attend events across our district in my role as assistant superintendent. And so making sure that you have an organized calendar with some support to make sure that you know when things are, and really being strategic about here's where I can make sure that I'm represented across the district, right? Don't just go to the events that are close or easy or convenient, but make sure that you see all the buildings, all the kids, all the schools. Connecting with the community through chambers of commerce and other things like that I know are important. If there's Rotary or other organizations, taking advantage of those opportunities. I've worked with those different organizations in my different districts in different capacities over the years. So I think that's another important aspect of staying connected. And making sure that you're present in the buildings during the day, right? Not just at the school events, but setting up a schedule. Something that my current superintendent does is actually schedules time in his calendar and has his assistant help support him in identifying which buildings, which classrooms, which teachers on any given day. And he set a goal this year, and I haven't checked with him recently to see if he's on track, but he set a goal this year to be in every teacher's classroom, which I think is amazing and something to aspire to, right? So really being intentional about not just saying you're going to do something, but setting a structure and a system in place to do it. So I think that's how I go about that.
Okay, great answer. Okay, what would you say your communication style is? And how would you plan on maybe using that communication style to work with the stakeholders?
I'm a pretty clear communicator. I tend to be pretty concise, maybe not in an interview context when I'm supposed to be bragging about myself or highlighting, but in written word, very concise, clear. I believe in making sure that everybody understands what's being said, trying to avoid ambiguity, because then people tend to make meaning for themselves, and maybe it's not the same as the meaning that was intended. In terms of communication, though, I think I usually start with listening. I'm a person that likes to understand the people with whom I'm communicating, the team that I'm working with, the community that I'm serving. I think understanding people as people, understanding people as individuals, makes communication stronger, right? So something that I strive to do as a boss, as a supervisor, is to really understand the people that I work with, so that I can give them what they need. What I figured out is that people are individuals, and they really have different communication styles, different communication needs, different needs for support. And the more deeply that I understand that about each individual person, the more effectively I can communicate with everyone, right? So I can give them what they need in those moments of one-on-one conversation, or even in the context of a group, recognizing the individual's needs and idiosyncrasies. I can, help support the group and navigate and facilitate so that group dynamic is a little bit more effective. And I think that that's something that is a strength.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So understanding our district and the last few years and stuff, how would you actually achieve transparency, how would you achieve transparency and build trust across their district and the community?
So I think most people that have worked with me would tell you that I don't know anything but transparency. I don't know how to be a different way. I think transparency has become an important word for us in our work. but it's just sort of who I am, an open book. And so I try to communicate clearly, dovetailing off that last question, but also repeatedly. Tend to be open about things. I like to explain why I think something, why I believe something, why I've made a decision. I also don't shy away from making difficult decisions, but also recognizing that I have the capacity to fix it if I've made the wrong decision or the less than optimal decision, right? So our task as leaders is to make the best decision that we can with the information that's in front of us and that we have at the time. And so we make those decisions. And sometimes we don't make the best decision, or there's additional information that comes up later, or there's another opportunity to improve that decision. I rest comfortably with that idea that that's something that is within my power as a person and as a leader, and I try to empower others to operate in that same way. Something that frustrates me pretty deeply is indecision, or the sense that we can't move forward and act on something because we are still considering options. At some point, we have to make a decision and move forward, recognizing, again, that we can always revisit that decision and revise and do so in a way that we communicate clearly. I think transparency also benefits from input. So finding ways to gather input from the community, from the schools, from the stakeholders, from the kids. In my past, I've set up a number of different mechanisms for doing that. Particularly with students. At one school, I built a student senate. At one school, I built a principal's advisory council and met regularly with students to get their input about things that were going on, to get their ideas and figure out how we might move those forward. Having a group like that be informed and aware of what's going on really aids transparency, because then they can also carry the message and communicate about how decisions were made and what was done, right? The more people that can carry the message, the more effectively it gets communicated.
And kind of building upon that other transparency stuff, it's going to happen, right? You're going to have a difficult conversation with stakeholders. How would you approach that situation and handle that?
I like to think that I would approach it with calm, with patience. Everybody communicates needs when they're communicating. When we talk about kids, we talk about the idea that behavior is communication, right? So if somebody is frustrated or terse in the way that they are communicating, that's a behavior that is communicating something beyond just the words that they're saying, right? And so being sensitive to that idea and trying to understand and demonstrate empathy, validate what people are saying, right? People have their feelings, they have their perspectives, they have their opinions, and they're valid because they come from another human being. I'm not here to tell people that they're wrong. I'm here to listen to what people are saying, both through their words, their tone, their body language, and everything else, and then I'm trying to respond in kind and give them what they need. I've had plenty of difficult conversations in my time, particularly as a school administrator, and usually what I'm trying to do is work toward, let me back up. So every conversation, every interaction is really a negotiation. This is something that I learned in classes that I took in my postmaster's programming. In being effective in a negotiation, I don't mean like a contract negotiation. In a negotiation, what you have to do is anticipate other people's issues, right? What are the issues that are of interest to them, that are important to them? What are the things that they value, that they're worried about? What outcomes are they hoping for in this conversation, in this interaction? So you work to anticipate those things. You get very clear about what your own issues are, the things that are important to you and matter to you. And then you try to find common ground, right? You seek an opportunity, not necessarily to compromise, although that is one avenue, but everybody can walk away feeling like they benefited, like they gained something. Does not have to be win-lose. And in fact, I think most of the time in human interaction, it's not win-lose.
Okay, I'm next. I'm going to ask you some questions about student achievement.
Okay.
What are the most important areas in which Oxford Community Schools should invest time and money to ensure student success?
So I think that some of the things that you are doing are incredibly important to ensuring student success, and I see an investment in this district in mental health and wellness. There's a saying, Maslow before Bloom, right? The hierarchy of needs. Before we start getting into depth of knowledge and thinking about academics, people have to have those fundamental needs met before they can be successful in the classroom. Kids have to be fed, they have to feel safe, they have to be physically safe, they have to feel comfortable, they have to feel seen and heard and understood by their teachers, by their school, by all the staff there. And so that investment can't be overstated. I think the use of restorative practices creates a sense of community in a school and allows that community to be rebuilt when harm is caused. And I think that that's a valuable endeavor in terms of supporting academics. And I realize that I haven't touched on strictly academics yet, but I have come to learn over time. This certainly isn't where I started 20 years ago as a teacher, but I have come to learn that that's really important. And if we don't do those things, kids aren't going to be successful academically. In terms of academic side of things, I think you've done a significant investment, or you've engaged in a significant investment in the International Baccalaureate programming that you have as an IB district. That's almost unheard of, particularly in the Midwest and in Michigan. IB education is phenomenal. It's among the best. Having taught in it, I can say that. I would recommend IB learning to anybody. And so I would double down on that if that's the direction that the board is supportive of. And the community is supportive. I think that there's such value to it. What teachers learn in terms of academic strategies, in terms of instructional strategies, in terms of integrating content across disciplines, and providing students those authentic learning opportunities, it's unmatched, right? The professional learning that teachers receive through IB programming, the clarity of objectives and how they're supposed to get there, is really just amazing. And so I would say that IB is something that's very powerful and that we should continue to pursue. I know that sometimes when you implement programs over time, the implementation starts to diminish. And I'm certain that with some of the challenges that we've experienced here in Oxford, that some of that has happened, right? It's just a natural consequence. I can speak just from somebody in a different district during the pandemic. The systems and programs that we had in place were severely disrupted by that pandemic, and it has taken us lots more time than we thought it would to get those systems back in place. And I've had the opportunity of working in multiple districts since the pandemic, and I see it in both places. So in terms of other academic endeavors, I know that the evaluation tool was part of the strategic plan. The instructional framework, the Marzano, was part of the strategic plan before. I would revisit that and understand if that is doing what we want it to do. I think that evaluation, and in particular the feedback that we supply to our teachers, is one of the biggest levers that we have. We know that feedback to teachers in the form of instructional coaching is the biggest lever we have with teachers in order to improve instruction. And so finding ways to do that, so making sure that that is the instructional framework that supports our needs, making sure that we are implementing that with fidelity, and looking for opportunities to further utilize or implement, if we don't have them, instructional coaches for our teachers. Because the power of feedback can't be overstated. We know that people benefit from feedback. Typically our music teachers are masters of giving feedback. You think about coaches on sidelines of games.
Cheering himself
I wish I could say I knew that. But being able to give that quick, immediate, timely feedback, direct, specific, and actionable, is essential to improving teacher instruction, right? So when you sit in a classroom as a teacher, or stand in a classroom as a teacher, or run around in a classroom as a teacher, you don't have the full sense of what's going on, right? Like, you don't know everything that you're doing. You're not recording it in your mind and able to play it back. The same thing is true of this interview right now. Like, I don't have a minute-by-minute recording in my head of everything that's happening right now, and later I'm going to be like, wait a minute. What did I answer well? What didn't I answer well? And I'm going to want feedback, which is why my wife, well, not the only reason my wife is here, but she is here, and I assure you will provide me lots of feedback. But being able to take advantage of whatever mechanisms we have, in empowering our school administrators and instructional coaches to really provide meaningful feedback to our teachers, will make the biggest difference in Tier 1 instruction. And then really digging into our MTSS, right? I know that we have a fairly robust elementary MTSS here. And that secondary is another area of focus, at least that's stated in the job posting, I think it was. Secondary MTSS is really challenging, but I think there are some things that can be done to make it work that haven't been tried before, and I'm trying to do them in my current district, but I would love to try those things here as well.
I don't know. You kind of touched on this, but if you have anything else to add, what do you see as being the biggest challenges for student achievement in Oxford?
I mean, there's the obvious, the impact of the tragedy, the impact of everything that has occurred since. Division within the community comes into the schools, and if there's a lack of trust of the schools or of the school personnel, the administration, the board, whomever, that seeps into the schools. It affects teachers' sense of morale, their sense of safety in terms of trying new and innovative things that can actually help students. So again, it's the non-academic, non-traditional academic things that are going to make the biggest challenges for this school district, I think, in terms of raising student achievement. I know, at least through association, many people in Oxford, I have visited this school district a couple of times during my career, visited classrooms, seen things happening, came to learn things. I know there's amazing people here. I know that they want to do well. We have to give them the tools that they need, and part of that is a sense of community and trust and safety, and then really listening to them about what they think they need in order to be successful with kids in the classroom. People in education, and I'm going to pretend it's better than every other industry, but I've only been in education, but people in education are amazingly insightful, right? They're very reflective, they tend to think a lot about things, and they have opinions about everything. And so if you're willing to ask them and you're willing to listen, you're going to get a lot of actionable feedback. There's that feedback again. And so I think that's key.
Thanks.
Thank you.
So how do you envision, as superintendent, that you'd be able to bring the parents, the community, our organizations, governmental agencies together to help create a healthy learning and working environment for our staff, our teachers, and our students?
I'm going to start with listening again. I can't presume as somebody outside of Oxford right now to know all the ins and outs and the needs and the wants. But being present and being available to those groups, traditionally I think what superintendents do when they come to a school district is they do some sort of listening sessions or listen and learns. And they most often do those with the families or the staff or the kids, but really trying to push into the community. Obviously, doing those kinds of things would be open to the community, but being really intentional about finding avenues to engage all of those other parties. Connecting with Oxford proper, not just the school district, in meaningful ways, attending meetings, being an advocate. I think strategies that work internally inside of the school district will work externally, and really applying those. But first, it's listening. It's getting to know people, right? I'm going to come back to what I said earlier about understanding who people are, how they operate, how they tick, what their needs are, how they think. I love to be able to anticipate what somebody's going to say if I figured them out. It gives me a sense of comfort knowing that I know this person, right? And so really striving with all of those individuals that you mentioned and all those groups that you mentioned to really get to know people and invite them into the district if they're not already inside of the district in another way as a parent or something like that, to help them see the great things that we're doing and to help spark ideas for opportunities for connection, support, partnership, and things like that.
So, thank you. What would you classify your leadership style or philosophy when it comes to creating collaboration between school administrators and the teaching staff?
I'm thinking a little bit about that specific focus that you provided. So, my leadership style it's going to sound a little bit funny. I haven't come up with a better way to describe it, but I've been set on this for a while. Is lead like you love everyone, and you will. And so, obviously, we all have worked with people that maybe we don't get along with, or we don't see eye to eye, or that challenge us in ways that we could not possibly have anticipated and test our patience, etc. But if I come at this work from a place of caring, of genuine caring, not just saying I care, but genuine caring about people as individuals, about them as human beings, even those most challenging individuals, it's a lot easier, right? And you start to find that there are things that you value and appreciate and care about genuinely about these people. I want everyone to be successful. I want individuals to be successful. I want their team to be successful. I want the whole team to be successful. And I just operating from that mindset of lead like you love everyone and you will has very much helped me. I have a great team in my current district. They're remarkable. But we don't always all get along. We don't always see eye to eye. We don't see things the same way. But what I did with them in order to cultivate this team is we did a retreat this past summer. Once we had restructured the team and had some new members. And at that retreat, I asked them a question. I said, what, in order to be successful, do you need from me? What do you need from this team? And what do you need from yourself? And the thing that you need from yourself, you are welcome to not share. But if that's something that you think would be helpful for us to help you, then share. And we carry those things through, right? So what has happened as a result of that approach is I see the team members using those things that we learned about each other or ourselves in the retreat in interacting with each other. And I think I'm telling that story because I think that's the same way that I would approach building administrators and teachers and building a sense of trust. The building administrators have to lead like they love everyone. They have to actually care about their teachers and want them to be successful. They have to believe in them. They have to be willing to have tough conversations when something isn't going well. But they also have to be there with support at the same time. There's a book that I read a number of years ago, but then we actually ended up rereading in my current district called Radical Candor by Kim Scott. She is not an educator by nature, and she's very much an instructional leader, but she's not in the world of education. She's from tech, Google, Apple. And she talks about this idea of caring deeply, but also challenging directly. And that's radical candor, right? So teaching people to do that, I think, is essential to moving that forward in terms of the relationships of building administrators supporting teachers.
What about other work groups?
I mean, I think it's universal. It applies to all the work groups. I thought the question was
It
teachers.
was.
Okay, thank you. I was like, oh boy, did I just jump off the deep end on that one?
It was a very intentional question, so.
I appreciate it. I don't think it's any different. Everybody in the organization contributes something, and that something is incredibly valuable. Otherwise, we wouldn't have that position. Everybody contributes something. And recognizing these people for what they contribute, I had, when I was at the International Academy, my daytime lead custodian, his name's Steve, he was somebody that was, I think, way overqualified for what he was doing. He had his journeyman's license, like he could do anything in the building, and he would come to me with solutions. And so I poured into this guy because I could rely on him for anything. And I referred to him as my assistant principal. My title at the time was associate principal. He was my assistant principal. This guy could do anything. And he wanted to. He wanted to be good. He wanted the school to be good for the kids. He wasn't a custodian cleaning. He did those things, but he did so much more. And I think that we built a good relationship, and that empowered him to do more, right? Like, everybody does something important, and they can contribute in ways that, again, you may not anticipate based on their role, based on their background, based on any number of factors, but they can do so much. A kid could have that custodian or that secretary or that paraprofessional be their one person, right? We want every kid to have one person, and it doesn't have to be a traditional educator, but we want every kid to have that. And by building those relationships with those people in all of the roles, I think that's where the magic happens, right? When we say community, I think our default is to think of the school itself or like the classroom, where teachers really do an amazing job building a sense of community. But we're talking about everybody involved. Everybody should want to be there every day. Everybody should feel valued every day. And everybody should be contributing every day. And if we get all of those arrows pointing in the same direction, there isn't anything we can't do.
Thank you.
So it was noted in many of the focus groups that the students, staff, and community at large are still. Can't hear you. Is that better? Okay. I'll start all the way over. So it was noted in many of the focus groups that the students, staff, and community are deeply affected by the tragedy of 2021. What experiences, philosophy, or trainings do you have in the following areas? School safety, trauma-informed care, crisis management, and policy management.
I have training in trauma-informed care, although that's never a one and done, that's a journey. So I think in my resume I highlighted that I brought trauma-informed care to Royal Oak High School before we were talking about trauma-informed care. Had that training done by Oakland Schools. In my current district, we've recently added positions to our K-6 buildings called Student Success Coaches. And those Student Success Coaches are there to support the principals in responding to behavior, but they're also there to build the capacity of the school in a trauma-informed restorative school approach, right? Using applied educational neuroscience to identify why behaviors, to meet behaviors upstream before they happen, to really help kids feel a sense of safety, to really help kids feel an understanding of their nervous system and how they're responding to things, so that they can understand their emotions and then control them, right? So we've done a lot of work in that area. I have unfortunate experience dealing with difficult situations and crises in previous positions, particularly when I was a high school principal. In a matter of 3 years, in addition to the pandemic, as part of overlapping those 3 years, we had a student pass away suddenly from a condition, and then a teacher pass away, and then we had a recent grad from 2020, in the fall of 2020, pass away on campus at the institution she was attending. And then we had a student commit suicide. And then we had a teacher retire and then shortly thereafter pass away due to a recurring illness. And of course, again, the pandemic. That was difficult, especially during the pandemic when we could not be close to each other. We were consoling each other online, making plans to support kids in the community online. But that experience has impacted me in a way that helps me to think clearly about how do you respond to a situation like this? What needs to happen? Who needs to be involved? What parties need to be there? What is the communication plan? All of those things are sort of now a part of the way that I operate. And so when we have a situation in my current district, fortunately thus far nothing as severe, but even something like a threat comes in, and how do we respond, how are we communicating, participating in that process. You said crisis management.
School safety and policy management.
Policy, I have experience in policy management. I think that, if you think about implementing change, there's two ways to go about it. One is sort of like the grassroots effort, almost couldn't find the expression, grassroots effort, so sort of from the groundswell. And then the other way is policy. So policy, if you really look at how policy works, there have been a number of times throughout history where policy sort of impacts change by forcing the policy, but the change doesn't occur immediately, but it provides that window, that opportunity for behaviors to change, for actions to change, whatever it is. It could be around, if I'm thinking of like federal policy around cigarettes or something like that, or vaping, right? Stuff like that could be very impactful, or was very impactful, depending on which one we're looking at. And so understanding how to manage policies, stay up to date, and make sure people are trained. So one of the things that I implemented when I was at Royal Oak, I was a new administrator there. I had not worked in the district previously. And one of the things that I found when I first got there is that we were not all on the same page in our understanding of what policy said. We would often say, well, policy says, well, we have to do this because of policy. But to a person, you might have different interpretations or understandings of what those policies were. So as an administrative team, we began a policy review. And so every week the administrative team would meet. And I would bring 1 or 2 policies forward to that administrative group, my building administrative team, and we would review those policies and make sure that we understood the nuances. Any number of policies would surprise you if you don't read the policy language. So I think that making sure that people are trained, that they are aware of, that they understand policy, and that anytime that there's a policy change, you have to take the time to do that and then revisit it on a regular basis. So there were some policies in Royal Oak that were very important to that community and to that school. And so, with our staff, every school year, at the beginning of the school year, we revisited those policies. If there were any changes, even if there weren't changes, because those are things that we needed everybody to particularly understand.
Thank you. And as the new leader, how do you help the school district and community heal at the same time moving forward educationally?
I don't know for certain, but I suspect that the educators, the teachers, the principals, the other leaders in the schools, they want to move forward. They're looking for the opportunity to do that work and really get down to business. But I think, it goes back to the listening. I can't come in with a prescription. I don't work in this community. I don't live in this community. I can't predetermine what it is that this community exactly needs. But I think listening to what it is that community members want, what it is that families want, what it is that our teachers want, need, principals need, and really working to synthesize those. So, I envision a transparent process in terms of those listening tour ideas or those listen and learns, really being open about what is being heard, what I'm interpreting, and what action steps are going to be taken as a result of those learnings. I don't know any other way to do it other than to engage those individuals and those groups head on. We have to work together on this and really get to the bottom of what it is people want, need, in order to move forward.
So, you were talking about it again, listening and mentioning getting feedback from the community and different stakeholders, but specifically when it involves I'll just read the question how it is. What is the level of involvement and participation of certain employees in organizational decisions? How do you determine what groups to include and when?
I think that the simple answer is if a group is affected directly, then that group should have some sort of voice in the process. Not everything is a democracy, but you don't have to be running a democracy to gather input, right? I can still make a decision, but I can gather input, and I'm the one making the decision, or this person is empowered to make that decision, and their expectation is that they're gathering input from folks affected. So the simple version is, are you directly impacted? Then if so, you should be involved in the conversation. But it also doesn't hurt to involve those at times who are indirectly impacted, right? We assume sometimes that if we talk about something specific to teachers or a teacher bargaining agreement, that it only affects teachers. But that's probably not the case. It probably impacts some other folks. So getting input from, first of all, anybody directly or indirectly impacted, but I also don't mind listening to anybody, right? Like, people have opinions, people want to share things, like, there's no harm in it. Now, try to do it in a structured way. There's 24 hours in a day and 7 days in a week, but being willing to listen and understand people's perspectives on topics, maybe even that they're not directly interacting with, is okay. But my simple version or my direct version is those directly impacted.
Well, like to hear earlier that you don't shy away from making tough decisions. So along those lines, what has been the most unpopular or challenging decision you've had to make, and how did you handle the reaction to this decision? On top of that, what would you do differently, if anything?
Unpopular. I think everything I do is popular. That's a tough one. I'm going to struggle with that a little bit. I mean, I can think of decisions that not everybody liked. You know, following, actually, the Oxford tragedy, I was working at Royal Oak, and I had had a surgery, and so I was working half-time. I was doing rehab and recovery for the other half of the time. And so we watched the events unfold on TV, and we were struggling with how to communicate with our community about what was happening with our kids. And I wasn't in the building the next morning, and I made the decision, along with input from some folks, that we weren't going to move forward with any conversation about what had happened because we didn't have enough information until I was present in the building. That seemed important. And at the time, that sort of outweighed all the other needs for us to communicate. That was not the right decision. In retrospect, I should have rearranged life, which was possible, to be there and to move things forward. But I think that decision, I lost some folks that day in terms of trust, in terms of understanding where we were going. I would say that before that, like, we had a really good rhythm. Everybody was kind of on the same page. Everybody understood why decisions were made, how things came to be. They came to expect a certain level of communication, and I think that I failed and didn't provide that. So to do differently, I would certainly have changed what was communicated and when. I would have listened to some other people that I wasn't listening to at the time. Yeah. And then, you know, the follow-up for us was the concerns about safety and procedures and policies in our own school and in our own district in response. And I think that is where I was able to regain some trust, because I was able to communicate clearly about what we do and clearly about how we do things. And to the point earlier of messengers, in those conversations, other staff were able to point out that these are the things that we do, and they could say, even secretaries were pointing out things that administrators did in terms of practice and approach in dealing with those difficult situations. So I think I regained it there, but I probably doubled down there to make up for it.
On to board superintendent relationships and responsibilities. How do you view the board superintendent relationship? How will you keep board members informed and communicate with us?
So the relationship's incredibly important, right? Like, one of the key essential roles of the board is hiring a superintendent. We know some of the other functions, but that's an important one. No pressure. I think communicating is important. I think, you know, in any role of leadership in any organization, you have to communicate. So you have to set up a system. And so, as a principal or as an associate principal, as an assistant superintendent, as a regional director, I can point to, they all have different names, but different newsletters or weekly updates that I provided or organized, along with others, to the constituents, whoever they were. Maybe as a regional director, it was the principals and other leaders in the district. As a principal, it's a community newsletter and a staff newsletter, right? So like building those things and having them come out regularly and on a predictable basis, I think is very important. So a board report on a regular basis, every week at a minimum, and then other communications in the interim, right? I think one-on-one meetings are important. So I have the opportunity to hear from each of you, understand your perspective as a board member. I think of, the collective board is the boss, but the individual board members contribute to that collective. And so really understanding those dynamics. So regular meetings, and I don't know what folks are accustomed to or amenable to, but, at least monthly individual meetings. We obviously have all of our public meetings. And then weekly communications, an emailed updated report containing things around the district, what's going on, things that I need to bring your attention to. Maybe there are some things upcoming for the board related to student discipline, and so that's something that you would get some background information on, or keeping you apprised of some parent communications or anything like that. Like there's any number of things that board members need to know about, but I think that that's a rhythm. Like those are my ideas. There's a rhythm that we have to establish together in terms of your expectations and what works for you as individuals and as a board. So.
Thank you. In an effort to achieve what is referred to in other industries as high reliability or just culture, how do you perceive the role of the superintendent in achieving that at Oxford?
I think the superintendent is the lead on that, right? Modeling for others what's expected. Do what you say. Say what you're going to do. Tell them you did it. Being clear about that. Creating systems that have a clear plan, that have monitoring and accountability built in, that have the ability for us to evaluate and follow up. I think you get to high reliability by having systems put in place. I think systems, well, at first there's an implementation phase. I think systems actually make things easier for people. Right? If you can build a system that takes something off of somebody's plate, yes, there's a learning curve, but then eventually takes something off of people's plates, they're more able to do their direct job and responsibilities. And that's how the system does what it says it's supposed to do, right? If we're here to educate kids and make sure that kids are safe, we have to put all the systems in place that we can to automate almost all of those things that can be automated, right? Anything that we can even streamline, if we can make a form simpler or a process simpler, it takes those things out of the way, and it helps people know them. And if people know the processes and know how we do things, then they're more likely to do them with fidelity, which is what we want.
Do you have any questions for us?
I was going to make a joke.
We ask your what?
Please don't. I'm curious. I only have a couple questions, but one is if you have any thoughts that you would like to share about the immediate next steps for the district in terms of any of the things that you're working on, be it academics, physical safety, psychological safety. Like, are there things that you see in July, the superintendent starts July 1st, like that person needs to start running on immediately?
I think there's probably a lot of things that we could put into that bucket, but I think probably the most imperative thing that the next superintendent needs to do is establish relationships and learn what systems are in place already. I think that would be the key, first 60 days of any great superintendency is to understand the people here, especially not being here and coming internally. We have lots of programs that are in function, And I know my vice president to the left would say, start crunching the data and understanding, are they working, are they not working? Do we need to cut fat somewhere to give someone else more? Types of things. I think those would probably be the immediate things, but I can't express the need for relationship building as probably one of the top priorities and probably the hardest thing the superintendent will do coming into Oxford.
Appreciate that. And is there, in the back of your mind, if you can share, one thing that you think the next superintendent should know? I mean, that's an important one for sure.
We're like the greatest community around, just so you know.
We're a small community, but I think I think our size may be small in comparison to some of the big districts that we, compete in band and sports and things like that in our Oakland County area. But we have comparatively many more programs than they do. Being an IB district, having a robust arts program, having a awesome marching band, and our musicals. We really are extremely competitive, even though our size is half of whom we compete with on almost every level. Our special education is awesome. Everything always can be a little bit better, but our academics, our arts, everything is top drawer.
That's awesome.
So for a small community, we play big.
And
Big
we're-
hearts.
And what I would add is we're still recovering.
Yeah.
It's not been a straight linear journey, and it's not going to be that for a while. And so I think that would be something to know coming in, is recovery is still important to us. And even though some of our high school students may have graduated, our staff are still there. And those high school students may have had siblings, neighbors, and friends who haven't got to the high school yet. And so there's still a lot of work we have to do in our community, and that's why I go back to impress that we are a great community, but we also value relationships.
I appreciate that. Thank you. I think that's all I have.
Great. Well, we appreciate you coming up and entertaining with us for an hour.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Okay. Did we have any unscheduled public comment? Angela Kelly, one?
That's going to be your new name, Angela Kelly.
Yeah. All right. Just let her sit back down. All right. Mark?
Well, I just want to state why I'm here as an advocate for the 4 children who are not here and all the survivors of our needless shooting that would not have happened on November 30th if the school leadership had done their jobs. I'll be here until every person who failed leaves this district and all lawsuits are settled. I'd like to thank Tanya, who was our first candidate, for pointing out that all families deserve to have their children come home. And I'm pointing that out to Mary and Heather, since they still seem to think they're adding value here when they actually were the ones responsible for the failure and the deaths of these children. And also, Michael, I appreciate the points he made, that if a bad decision is made, it can be revisited and reconsidered, which is a great concept. If we can't change, then I guess we have no intelligence. I appreciate him pointing out the need for empathy and also the need for kids to feel safe and trust. And I just want to point out, there will never be trust in this school or in our community as long as Heather sits at this table and as long as Mary is here. So if you want to help this community move forward, I'm challenging you to take responsibility for your failures. Every other board member from November 30th was smart enough to get out of here. But not you two. You think you're here. Every time we see you, you're a trigger, and I see dead children when I look at you. So you think you're adding value. I just want you to know, we're not going anywhere until you leave or we remove you, okay? And, you know, I think if the investigative report, Mary, had come out before your election, I don't think you would have been reelected if people knew the truth about your failure. So I want to thank our president, Aaron Reese, and our vice president, Amanda, for the efforts you're putting in to rebuild our school while having to deal with these two dragon anchors. Thank you to the Evolve for having Evolve security at the theater events. They need to be on whenever the school is unlocked. To have that Vicky Markovich has our systems on half of the time is ridiculous. We talk about security, but we don't provide security for all the children. You only get security if you're at a certain meeting or at a certain event. But the rest of the time, all the after-school events are left unsecured. If we haven't learned anything, is that security should be a top priority. And I also want to thank the contractors from Fortis, like Matt and Greg and Jim. They're really doing a great job of building bridges and engagement with our community. We really appreciate what you guys are doing. And also all the teachers that are working with our kids. We love you, and we are trying to resolve the problems here as quickly as we can so we can put our energies into supporting you and cheering for you and the children in this community. But it's really hard to do with Mary and Heather here.
Thank you, Mark. Item 7 on the agenda is our scheduled activities. We do have 2 more nights of interviews, tomorrow night and Wednesday night, followed by conversations with coffee on Thursday night, and our regular board meeting was moved, as you recall, to next week. Any final board comments? I do have one, but I thought I'd check with you guys first.
I just wanted to thank the candidates for coming today, traveling and interviewing with us.
In the board portal, you'll see the Delphi scoring technique. If you guys want to start looking at that, if you need to understand it, reach out to the HYA associates. It's a very structured way of how you create an evaluation of a candidate, so we have fair and unbiased evaluations. So take a peek at that and then fill it out for the first 2 candidates. As we go through the process, we'll do it for all of them. All right, 7:55, meeting adjourned.